Welcome back. This is Today, and interest rates have left consumers straining under financial stress. Some have been unable to pay the installments on their vehicle loans even. Debt Rescue is advising consumers to know their rights and take the necessary steps to protect themselves from vehicle repossession. There's been a 4% increase in vehicle owners defaulting on their repayments in the first quarter of this year alone. Debt Rescue Chief Operating Officer Annaline Poel joins us this afternoon to discuss this further. Thank you very much for your time this afternoon, Annaline. I mean, we've got a huge number of an increase of about 4% in the amount of vehicles that are being repossessed, or people not being able to honor their debt repayments when it comes to their vehicles. What would you say is behind the steep increase in repossessions that we've seen over the last quarter?
Well, I think the two biggest factors that we are looking at is right now, obviously inflation. Inflation is pushing the cost of living up in the form of our normal day-to-day expenses. And obviously the manner in which inflation gets dealt with is by having to increase the interest rates so that, of course, we can try and get inflation down again. So for the average consumer out there, their budget is being affected in two places: their living expenses as well as their debt repayments. And most people have very, very little room to maneuver in their budget to be able to compensate for these increases everywhere. And unfortunately, people are having to make decisions. Do they put food on the table, or do they repay their debt?
And I suppose the question there would be, what are the repercussions of defaulting on your vehicle payments? At what point does the bank decide, or any financial institution that gave you that vehicle asset financing, decide we're taking our vehicle back? But also then, how do they safeguard against that point of repossession?
Well, I think it's really important to understand that in terms of the National Credit Act, on any of your agreements, you have 20 days after your contractual installment is due, within which you have to obviously make that payment. After 20 days, you then will be, the credit provider has the right to advise you that they now have the right to proceed with legal action. It comes in the form of what they call a Section 129 letter. And they usually can, that letter then gives you 10 days within which to take some form of action. And that action, means coming to an agreement with them, paying the arrears or whatever. Or, of course, your biggest right is the fact that you can apply for debt counseling, and debt counseling then prevents them from proceeding with legal action. So really, really important is understanding that credit providers do have the right, and how they decide to enforce that right is obviously up to each of them. They look at a variety of factors. But by law, they can, after 20 days after you have defaulted, can advise you that they intend on proceeding, and that they need to take the necessary action to correct it, or else they might proceed from there forward.
Yeah. Do you find that a lot of consumers don't know much about their consumer rights? And do you think that if many were aware of an example that you've just provided, well, not the example, but the law around repossessions and defaulting on payments, we'd probably see less repossessions than we've been seeing?
Well, I think it's really important to understand that obviously, if you default, credit providers have the right to proceed with their action. But what we are also, advising consumers is, obviously, if you find yourself in this position where you are defaulting, and not just on obviously your vehicle, on any of your accounts, but with a vehicle and a home loan specifically, there's risk attached, because there's something they can come and take back. They can take back your vehicle. They can take back your home. They can proceed with legal action and take back your home. Is that in terms of the processes that your vehicle cannot, for example, be taken back until they have, firstly issued you with this Section 129 notice, until they have then issued you with a summons, and then that they've proceeded to get this default judgment against you, because you have the right to obviously defend that summons. And if you don't, they can get a default judgment, and then get what they call a writ of execution. And then the sheriff of the court can come with this, document from the court that they can take your vehicle back. The alternative of what we are seeing, though, and what we are cautioning consumers against is what is called the Section 127 voluntary surrender, that you do not hand your vehicle over unless it is these processes that have been followed, including it being the sheriff, including the fact that there is now a judgment and a writ of execution. It's really important that consumers understand their rights, and that if they were to hand over their vehicle voluntarily, that then the likelihood of them finding a solution to get that vehicle back becomes so much more difficult, and hence why we're saying, if you find yourself in this position and this impending legal action through this notice, for example, of a Section 129, that you immediately contact the debt counsellor, because debt counselling can prevent this legal action from proceeding against you, so that you can prevent your vehicle being repossessed. But like I said, really understanding the difference between their voluntarily handing it over in terms of Section 127, as opposed to the actual legal action in the form of the judgment and writ of execution having been executed.
Just for a bit of clarity, Annaline, when it comes to the Section 127, the voluntary handing over of the vehicle, what if the financial institution has done so, is trying to get the car from you as a consumer by sending a debt collector? Does a debt collector have any powers in that regard to say, we've been sent, we've come to pick up the car, or you have to wait for those processes that you described to us a moment ago, even in the Section 127 probability?
No. Well, so when it comes to you having to hand over your vehicle to anybody, like I said, it's only once the judgment has been issued and the writ of execution, so that the sheriff of the court, a collector cannot take your vehicle. They can obviously tell you that if you do not come to an agreement with them, the voluntary surrender is an option. It's a right you as a consumer have to voluntarily hand over your vehicle if you feel, look, there is no way that I will ever be able to, come to any manner of affording this vehicle, and I've made peace with the fact that I want to. But that's your right as a consumer. It's not the right of a debt collector or anybody to force you to hand the vehicle over. The Section 129 process and read with Section 130 process has to be followed, meaning go to court, issue the summons. You have the opportunity to defend yourself, and if you don't, then they can apply for a default judgment, then the writs of execution, etc. No, definitely, you do not have to hand your vehicle over to a collector who's asking you to voluntarily surrender it. Hence, always read the documentation that you are presented with. If they are asking you to just hand over your vehicle or telling you must, read what the document says in terms of what is it. Is it a Section 127, or is this an actual, a judgment, writ of execution that they are handing you?
And then finally, Annaline, if you will, if you can see that next month I'm not going to be able to have that 7,500 Rand I pay for my car every month, what is the first thing you should do? Does approaching the lender help in any way?
It's a possibility, and it's usually the first step that we recommend, because for some consumers it might just be a short-term issue that might have happened. For example, maybe you had unexpected expenses this month where you had to maybe skip the payment so that you could fix the vehicle because something went wrong. But that is, they might look at an option of solution for you in the short term. However, if it's a situation of your total debt portfolio and your total living expenses have just gotten to the point where you can no longer afford your debt repayments, then it's one of those scenarios where you should rather look at it holistically, and hence why we say then look at debt counselling as an option, because debt counselling makes provision for your necessary living expenses as well as the ability for you to honour your debt repayments, but it's just at a lower amount over a longer period of time, but giving you that legal protection, which is what people are needing right now more than anything to prevent these repossessions happening. So it just depends on circumstances. It is a possibility, but obviously it's at the discretion of the credit provider as to whether they would consider it, whereas with debt counselling, obviously it's a legal process that then takes place and gives that legal protection.
Thank you very much for those insights. That's Annaline van der Poel from Debt Rescue, giving us a sense of the trend when it comes to car repossessions, but also your rights as a consumer and the steps that you have at your disposal to perhaps prevent a situation where your car is taken away or any other big ticket item that you've taken out on loan, like a home.